Hey class, today we're going to talk about the anatomy and physiology of the gastrointestinal system in this video. Now, similar to the respiratory system where that was divided up into conducting and respiratory, the GI system is divided up into the alimentary canal and accessory organs to the GI tract. Now, this looks like this. Alimentary canal, otherwise known as the GI tract, is that continuous tube from your mouth to your anus. It is anything that directly touches the food. You can think about this as being in the GI tract. That's the oral cavity, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. The accessory organs are not part of it, but assist in digestion. They are located around the alimentary canal. These include teeth, tongue, salivatory glands, liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Austin, my teeth and my tongue absolutely touch food. How come they are not in the GI tract? Excellent question. They are the exception. The reason they are the exception is that they are more or less tools to assist in it compared to some of the other things that are actually going to have secretions, enzymes, changing acid and base balance of the food. Teeth, tongue, they're really just there for assisting in mechanical digestion. Now, there is this really cool photo that will actually answer this. So list the organs that food will travel through. This photo has the alimentary canal and the accessory organs, and you can actually see them divided up on the left side and the right side. So you can see on the left side with the canal, you have oral cavity, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine. And then there's the accessory organs, the salivatory glands, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, and the things that aren't listed here are teeth and tongue. Now, let's start explaining some of the functions. I will be going into pretty deep detail in here, but what I want you guys to look at and study and know for the exam is anything on this photo for the alimentary canal, essentially all the things for that true GI tract, that continuous tube, mouth to anus. You can see here the structural properties of the organ as well as the functional role. What does this do to assist in digestion? Now, I have pulled up the next figure, which is just going to be summarizing the accessory digestive organs. But for right now, I really want to hone in and focus on these organs in the alimentary canal, another name for the GI tract. So let's get started. And we get started where food enters into the body, the mouth. So, the oral cavity or mouth. There are 4 different digestive processes that occur here: ingestion, mechanical digestion, propulsion, swallowing, secretion. Let's talk about it. Now, you can see that some of these words here are going to be bolded. Think of these as key terms to know, or maybe fancy terms that show up in this system. So the main goal of the oral cavity is to turn food, food products, into a bolus. Bolus is just a term for food when it's all like mashed up, moistened, wet. It's a ball. So if you eat a Pop-Tart, or you eat a bowl of rice, or you eat a steak, once it's chewed and swallowed, that food is now called a bolus. So let's figure out how the mouth does this. First off, it's a primary function for housing the accessory organs, teeth. It's a key organ in mechanical digestion. Muscles in the jaw masticate, essentially that's chewing, the food into smaller pieces. Similar to what we talked about in the respiratory system, when things get smaller, their surface area increases. So by chewing it up and assisting in the moisture, we're essentially increasing the amount of surface area in that chewed food as it's turning into a bolus. Next, tongue. This assists in, one, tasting the food. Gotta make it taste good to reinforce the behavior in the brain, so you have taste buds. And it also helps in moving the bolus around. You may not really think about your tongue a lot when you're chewing, but you have hard and soft palate up above you. You actually use your tongue to move around it, squish it, and all other gross and fun digestion things that are occurring. Now, I know that I said that I wasn't going to be talking about accessory organs. However, I think in the mouth it's kind of unavoidable because the oral cavity really doesn't do much apart from housing all of these accessory organs and assisting in moving the bolus through. So the next one is salivary glands. They secrete saliva. It's a fluid containing water, enzymes, and mucus. Now, the first and kind of like gross and obvious thing about it is it moistens the food. That assists in allowing you to swallow a little bit easier, make it so that it doesn't hurt in terms of your mouth, because I'm sure that we have all had times when we didn't have enough saliva and we ate some chips and it would scratch as it goes down your throat. Saliva is simply that. However, it does have two very important things that you may not think about it. First one, salivary amylase. Keyword. If you ever see the word ACE, it codes for an enzyme. So this is the first digestive enzyme that is introduced into food. It catalyzes the beginning of carbohydrate digestion. In the next video, we're going to be talking about metabolism and digestion, and it's essentially the main point of the GI system. The main point is to turn that food into its base components and absorb it into our body so that we can use those nutrients to continue to build and do all the functions that we need to do. So, salivary amylase, it's the first enzyme, and what it's going to do is it's going to break down carbohydrates. Next one, lysozyme. This is a bacteria-killing substance. It essentially tries to help remove some bacteria in your mouth. Because when you eat something, similar to when you're breathing something, you are taking something outside in. And a lot of pathogens can hitch a free ride this way. It's one of the reasons why there was that old wives' tale, or essentially like word of mouth, where you would spit on a wound. It's not the best antiseptic, but you do have lysozyme in there, which starts destroying bacteria, plasma membranes. Gross, but cool. Now, we are leaving the oral cavity, or the mouth, and we're going to the next thing, the pharynx, throat. It consists of the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx. From the respiratory system, it also includes the nasopharynx, but if you're going up your throat, you're having a problem. Think about if you drink milk and you're laughing and it spews out your nose. That is the GI system not working appropriately, because instead of going from your oropharynx to your laryngopharynx, it's going from your oropharynx to your nasopharynx out. Gross. But the main thing that I want you to know about this is that your pharynx has tonsils. They're essentially lymphatic organs that help in the removal and process of bacteria. Another safeguard before we're actually getting down deeper into the body. Another thing is assisting in moving the bolus into the esophagus. Now, the esophagus. It's a muscular tube about 25 centimeters. And what it does is it transports the bolus from the pharynx into the stomach. The primary functions of it are propulsion and a small amount of secretion. That secretion is mucus, so that you're actually going to protect your esophagus as food continues to go down it. but it's propulsion. You are moving the food down. During swallowing, skeletal muscle and smooth muscle undergoes peristalsis, which is meaning that it's going to be pushing the bolus down. You're going to see the word peristalsis come up a lot, and it is essentially just the movement of squeezing and going down. Something to know is there is a sphincter that is at the end of your esophagus. When you think about a sphincter, it's going to be gross, but here's an easy way to remember it. Your butthole is a sphincter. We're going to be talking a lot about sphincters in the GI system. And all it is that it can open and close, which will prevent food from going in or out. So we have our gastroesophageal sphincter. It's connecting the esophagus to the stomach. And to the esophagus inferior end, known as the lower esophageal sphincter. It regulates the passage of the bolus into the stomach, prevents the contents of the stomach from re-entering the esophagus. Now, that is actually something that, while not necessarily common, does happen to a lot of people. And that's called heartburn. When you get the gastric juices and the fluid inside of the stomach going past and up through the gastroesophageal sphincter, that's actually heartburn. That's all it is. Now, we have made it to the stomach. Gotta love Microsoft Word. You move one thing and then it just... How about we don't do that? How about we do... That's gonna have to be good enough. So sorry, everyone. So, the stomach. It has three primary functions: secretion, propulsion, digestion. Now, some cool things to know about the stomach is we have something called rugae. These are folds in the stomach, and like a lot of things in the body, the purpose of it is to increase surface area. Your stomach is actually not that big. I've heard that it's like the size of two of your fists. It's a lot of things, but compared to the amount of food that you eat, there has to be something to increase that surface area. Rugaes are a ton of little folds inside of it that, as your stomach stretches, those folds grow out. Now, the oblique layer of smooth muscle allows the stomach to perform churning. This is a motion that pummels food into liquid chyme. Now, instead of food, technically a bolus, because remember, once food is masticated and chewed up and swallowed, it's no longer food, it's a bolus. Now, this is going to turn bolus from that semi-moist solid into an actual liquid chyme. Think about this, your stomach is churning. It is that washing machine. It is going to be moving all of that through to assist in digestion. Now, how are we actually going to digest something in the stomach? Well, we have to have some form of liquid. You have all heard about that there is gastric juices and that your stomach is very acidic. Let's figure out how that is happening. So, we have something called gastric glands. I really want to move the stomach just for my own sanity. Gonna have to deal with it and accept it. All right, so the gastric glands. These are multiple branch glands that contain both endocrine cells that secrete hormones into the bloodstream and exocrine that secretes an acidic enzyme-containing fluid, the gastric juice, into the lumen of the stomach. Now, you may not remember from Anatomy 1, but you guys focused all on the endocrine system. And now you're hearing a term called exocrine. Here's a super easy and simple way to remember this. Something is endocrine if it secretes something directly into the bloodstream. Exocrine is that it's excreting it somewhere else. So here, the gastric glands can secrete hormones into the bloodstream, that's endocrine, or exocrine, where those cells are going to secrete directly into the lumen, or that empty space in the stomach. This is where your gastric juice comes from. Now, an important histology thing to know, if we're in the stomach here, parietal cells. They're going to secrete HCl, or hydrochloric acid. This is where you get your acidity in your stomach from. Now, this hydrochloric acid keeps your pH of your stomach at around 2, and that's important for a few reasons. 1, activates pepsinogen. We don't know what that is yet, but we will. It destroys many disease-causing organisms. Remember, bacteria, viruses, and everything, they like to be in a very neutral level pH because that's what our body is, that's what our blood is, that's what our interstitial fluid is, and that's where most things are able to replicate. By having the pH of the stomach be so low, it's essentially acting as a pit of acid. And when you swallow it, they sizzle, burn, and die. Next one is it stimulates intrinsic factor, which is required for vitamin B12. Don't worry about that too much. But I do want you to know parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid, and that hydrochloric acid activates pepsinogen and destroys many disease-causing organisms. Now, let's talk about where pepsinogen comes from. What even is it? So you have cells called chief cells. These secrete inactive precursor enzyme pepsinogen. Like I said all the way back, if you see the word ogen, that means it's an active. When that's cleaved off, it becomes active. Anytime you see the word ogen. When pepsinogen encounters that acidic pH in the stomach, it becomes that active enzyme pepsin. And pepsin begins protein digestion in the stomach. So we talked about in the mouth, we had salivatory amylase, and that's what's starting carbohydrate digestion when we're starting. Now, in the stomach, we have chief cells secreting pepsinogen because of the HCl that is present in the stomach and that super low pH. That cleaves off the ogen and activates it into pepsin, and that begins protein digestion. Super, super, super simple way to associate pepsin with proteins. P starts with the P. Pepsin, protein digestion. Now, the stomach is actually a place where you can start to have very simple absorption happening. I'm talking about water, fat-soluble vitamins, super simple carbohydrates or proteins, or very, very small things. Not a lot of digestion actually happens at the stomach, which is surprising because that's what most people associate the GI system to do. However, most of the absorption and the real true intake of nutrients is going to happen into the next section, which is the small intestine. All right, small intestine time. Now, small intestine happens right after the stomach. Once that chyme is moved and it's been properly exposed, it's been properly mixed, and it's time to go over. There are 4 main processes that occur in the small intestine. This is where a lot of the magic happens. You have secretion, digestion, both chemical and mechanical, absorption, and propulsion. Now, the small intestine is divided up into 3 sections depending on the histological differences of it. First one, duodenum. It's the first part of the small intestine, and this is where we are going to get secretions from accessory organs. We have the gallbladder and the pancreas. Those secretions enter into it to mix with the chyme. The small intestines have these glands called Brenner glands, and that produces an alkaline mucus. That protects the duodenum from the acidic chyme, because remember, if the pH in the duodenum is, I think, 6 to 7.2, and the pH that is leaving the stomach is 2. Acid, similar to being on your skin, is going to burn if it's not in the appropriate environment. So the duodenum is protecting itself with these glands to produce this mucus, so as soon as the chyme enters, it's going to really raise up that pH. Now, the next section is the jejunum. It's the middle section of the small intestine, and this is going to be the most active for chemical digestion and absorption. Last one is the ileum, the final section, and it has a valve that separates it from the large intestine. This is again a sphincter that controls the movement of materials from the ileum into the sebum. Sebum is going to be the first part of your large intestine. This prevents materials in the large intestine from flowing backwards into it and is critical for preventing bacterial access. Now, you might be thinking, wait, Austin, how the hell am I going to remember duodenum, jejunum, ileum in terms of anatomy? Well, it actually goes in order. D, J, I. It's in the alphabet. The next one is They all end in UM. Duodenum, jejunum, ileum. Now, let's get into the meat and the potatoes of this small intestine and how so much magic is going to happen in here. That's just first off defining some of the anatomy. Now let's get into how this is going to work. It has a ton of folds. And again, those folds increase surface area. If we go back to it up here, you can see that the walls are arranged into 3 progressively smaller folds. You have circular folds, villi, and microvilli. These look like little tiny brushes that are going to look like this. They look like little fingers. You can see here in the histology where they are popping up and everything, where you have the villi, and then an even smaller form of it is going to be the microvilli. So you have fingers, and on top of the fingers, you have little tiny finger projections. Again, the whole goal of it is to increase surface area. So now let's talk about what happens here. The small intestine has mucosal folds into projections called villi. Each villus consists of a layer of endocytes surrounding a central core of blood capillaries and lymphatic vesicles called a lacteal. Now, you can see it here. Here's a photo of it. You have the enterocyte. You have your microvilli, which create a brush border, and that is because if you look under it in terms of histology, it literally looks like a little tiny toothbrush. You have your goblet cells, we'll get to that in a second, but you can see here you have your blood capillaries and your lacteal. All the way back in the lymphatic system where I talked about how dietary fats are not absorbed into the blood, they're absorbed through the lymphatic system first. Here's where those dietary fats enter. They enter in through your lacteal, and simple carbohydrates and amino acids, the basic building block of proteins, enter in through the blood capillaries. Now, compared to other things where we talked about peristalsis, which was the movement of food down through the GI system, small intestine has that. It has that peristalsis. It's propelling the chyme forward through the small intestine. You had that happening in your esophagus. You had that happening in your stomach. The stomach also had churning, which was essentially the spin cycle, which was trying to slosh it all around. And you have it in the small intestine to move it through the small intestine. However, you also have something called segmentation, which is intestinal churning. These are the contractions of the smooth muscle. And think about it that it's essentially squeezing that chyme, trying to get it to touch as much of the small intestine as possible. Here is essentially a good way to think about it in a difference. For peristalsis, you can see that it's kind of like you're moving that toothpaste through. You're squeezing it through. Compared to segmentation, where you are essentially trying to mix it and squeeze and rotate it so that it touches as much of the microvilli and those villi as possible. Because think about it, the body has spent so much time, energy, getting that food into a state where it can be digested and absorbed into the body. You want to make sure that you're not leaving anything left in that chyme. Now, the segmentation, the intestinal retraction, it's the squeezing one. The primary functions of this are mechanical digestion and mixing the chyme with the intestinal and pancreatic enzymes as well as the bile, making as much surface contact and really trying to work through all the stuff. We haven't talked about bile and we haven't talked about pancreatic enzymes. That's going to go a little bit into the accessory organs, but know that at the duodenum, first part of the small intestine, this is where that's starting to mix. And the small intestine is just making sure that everything connects and interacts. Lastly, we have the large intestine. The large bowel. Its function is secretion, propulsion, and defecation. This receives the material from the small intestine that was not digested or absorbed, and is the passageway for feces or fecal matter out of the body. At this point, things that are left in the large intestine really don't have a ton of nutritional value. However, what is something that is critical to know at that last stage in the GI system is the colon is active in absorbing water and electrolytes. It's important for maintaining fluid, electrolytes, and acid-base homeostasis. If you are having diarrhea, which is a huge cause of death in a lot of countries, it's because your large intestine isn't having enough time to absorb all of that liquid out from the chyme. It is a very important. However, the colon or the large intestine does have a stigma of being dirty or having a lot of bacteria. That's actually true. It does have a lot of bacteria, but we have a symbiotic relationship with the bacteria in our colon. They do a lot for us. They produce vitamins that are only made there, like vitamin K. They metabolize undigested materials. They are trying to, that's what their food is and everything. They deter the growth of harmful bacteria and they stimulate the immune system. There is a life-saving medical treatment, as well as you can do it if you are having a lot of stomach troubles, which is a fecal transplant, where it's exactly what it sounds like. You essentially have introduced feces into your small and large intestine to try to get as much of that bacteria to stick, healthy and good bacteria to stick. Now, the large intestine is divided up into segments. You have your sebum, first part, your colon, the longest part. It's divided up into 4 parts. Don't have it here. Don't worry too much about it. It's essentially just talking about, I'm sitting down, but it's talking about how it crosses over and where it crosses in each turn and bend gets its own separate area. Not as important as understanding for the small intestine, 3 sections there. And lastly, the rectum, it's the last part of the large intestine. So let's take a quick little look-see back at this one. We have oral cavity, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine. All of the organs that are in that alimentary canal, with the inclusion of teeth, tongue, and I also mentioned salivatory glands because that's all in the mouth. The mouth really doesn't have a lot of things special going on. Now, let's talk about part 2, where we're getting into the accessory organs that I haven't covered. Now, here is a photo of it. We've talked about the teeth, we talked about the tongue, we talked about the salivatory glands. That leaves us with the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. So, let's get after it. Pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. So these are accessory organs, similar to the salivatory glands, primarily for the GI system that we're talking about. They are exocrine glands that secrete products through ducts to outside of the body. Now, when it's highlighted and says outside, that does not mean it's leaving the body, it's just not going directly into the bloodstream. We're starting with the pancreas. It's a gland with both endocrine and exocrine functions. The endocrine functions, while important, very important, are hormones, insulin, and glucagon. These actually affect most cells in the body, and diabetes is having an issue with insulin. However, we have enough to cover for these exams. Don't worry about it too much. However, into the nursing field and everything, please read up on insulin sensitivity. Diabetes will be important. We're now a little bit more focused on the exocrine function of the pancreas, where we have this pancreatic juice. It is a collective secretions of pancreatic aner and duct cells. It consists of water and multiple digestive enzymes, bicarbonate ions, and other protein. Now, I want you guys to know 2 things in this pancreatic juice. You have cholecystokinin and secretin. Now, cholecystokinin, CCK, is produced by duodenal endocrine cells in response to the presence of lipids and partially digested proteins in the duodenum. It's going to act on the anacar cells to trigger the secretion of the digestive enzymes and proteins. So, CCK is produced by the duodenal endocrine cells in response to the presence of lipids and partially digested proteins in the duodenum. What you need to know about this: CCK is produced when there are lipids and partially digested proteins in the duodenum. Secretin, released by duodenal cells in response to acid and lipids in the duodenum. Secretin is released by duodenal cells in response to acid and lipids in the duodenum, triggering the duct cells to secrete bicarbonate ions. Now, these are here in the pancreas, but they aren't secreted by the pancreas. This photo is going to give you a better understanding of what I am talking about. Right now, we are dealing with the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. You can see here, the duodenal cells release secretin and cystokinin into the blood. That binds to the anacar cells in the pancreas, and that releases the secretion of enzymes and bicarbonate ions from the pancreas into the duodenum. So think about this for a second. When chyme is leaving the stomach, the duodenum is like, whoa. This shit is too acidic. I need help. So the pancreas secretes these bicarbonate ions, which help stabilize the pH in the duodenum so that it isn't going to be burned completely off by that acidic chyme. Now, earlier we talked about how there are burner glands. That is not enough to bring the pH from a 2 to a 7. You need the bicarbonate ions from the pancreas to assist in it. Now, that's response in the presence of lipids and partially digested proteins. Remember, partially digested proteins. Why are they partially digested? Because of the pepsin found in the stomach that already started to break apart some of those protein bonds. Now, that's pancreas. Liver time. Now, we all saw how massive the liver was in our fetal pig dissection, and it's because the liver is so important. It is one of the most diverse organs in the body. It's going to release endocrine and exocrine secretions and converts harmful chemicals into non-toxic substances that the body can eliminate. Think of your liver as your chemical processing plant. The easiest one that I can talk about is if you drink a ton of alcohol, your liver is damaged. It's because your liver is your poison control center and is going to work tirelessly to try to neutralize it. Now, what I want you to know about the liver. First thing, the main functional unit of the liver is the hepatocyte. So what's the main cell that works in the liver? Hepatocyte. Anytime you see the word hept or hepto, it's liver, and remember, cyte is cell. Now, the main digestive function of the liver is to produce bile. It is a liquid that contains water, electrolytes, and organic compounds. Bile serves two functions. It assists in the digestion and absorption of lipids, and it is a mechanism which the liver excretes waste and other substances that the kidneys cannot excrete. We haven't talked about the kidneys yet, we haven't talked about the urinary system, we will, but bile is essentially helping to excrete waste that other substances the kidneys can't deal with. But for the main purpose of what you guys want to know for this test, it assists in the digestion and absorption of lipids. However, like I said at the beginning, the liver is not just an organ that is producing your bile. It is nutrient metabolism. It processes the nutrients obtained from the diet. Detoxification. It detoxifies substances produced by the body or substances that we eat or drink, which are harmful. And excretion. It directly excretes bilirubin and bile, along with other substances the liver produces, particularly certain antibodies, and modifies substances so they can be excreted by the kidneys. However, for the liver, main function that I want you to know is the functional unit of the liver is the hepatocyte, and its main function is to produce bile, and that bile assists in the digestion and absorption of lipids. Last accessory organ, and then we are done with the anatomy and physiology of the GI system at a top level. Gallbladder. It's a small sac that sits on the posterior liver. It was that little green organ that we saw when we were doing that fetal pig dissection, and it receives most of the bile from the liver. Its main purpose is to store the bile, concentrate the bile, and release it when stimulated. So the liver is just going to continuously produce bile, but it is stored and concentrated in the gallbladder until it is stimulated to release it. Now, what could potentially be telling it to release this? CCK. This triggers the contraction of smooth muscle in the gallbladder, releasing it into it. Now, let's go back to CCK. It's in the response to the presence of lipids. Bile assists in the digestion of lipids. This is the trigger that would cause the gallbladder to release that bile to assist, because the worst thing in the body is to spend all this time and energy to make something, only to release it at the wrong time. Cool. And if we look back at our little chart, you can see here, liver, mechanical digestion, via bile production, excretion, waste in the bile. Gallbladder, mechanical digestion, stores, concentrates, releases bile. Pancreas secretes enzymes, secretes bicarbonate ions. Cool. Those are the main things. Everything else is just knowledge on top of knowledge that is going to be important in understanding the GI system, but primarily for studying for the test, look at these figures. Look at these tables. Know them. That's all.